Herbert's 100 Harem. The city slept deep and well at night. Despite its weird shelf, tower-style construction, it seemed to almost fold in on itself when darkness hit the world. Oh, sure, there were lights here and there, but for the most part, the city made immense use of natural light, both reflected and direct. A strange policy of the people had it, so there were only lights at the edges of the massive platforms as a sort of warning light. Little traffic, less people, and only a few lights. Very still and quiet, almost respectful and considerate compared to the cities of Earth. Of course, most of this is because everyone's busy peeking out windows to make sure no one's spying on their little clubs. He mutters to himself in disgust. The suit he commissioned from the Dauntless had arrived, a fully body Kevlar stocking that went from black to dark blue with light-absorbing dark blue visor covering his eyes. There wasn't a single millimeter of exposed skin on him. For weapons, he had specialized silenced guns with the little axiom tricks mastered by the EFL and a series of both smoke and flashbang grenades coupled with a solid K-bar, and mostly for intimidation, a straight single-edged sword with a large curved tip. A falchion, it's called, basically the sword that a machete is a disappointing grandson to. His target doesn't seem dangerous. Of course, that's the point. The target is a distraction, he knows this. He'd managed to sneak into the apartment of Miss Darla Swipe and take a few DNA samples out of the alien Roomba, as well as plant a few bugs. However, he had found out after running the bit of fur through the sampler that there was actually a Miss Margarine Jules in the apartment, and that the hair had shown signs of heavy chemical modifications, enough to almost destroy the DNA. Currently, he was working under the assumption that Jules was working as Swipe's body double to give the woman a 24/7 alibi. But he wasn't sure, which was why he was watching closely. So far, he was just peeping on a civilian whose DNA did not match up with their legal identity, a strictly small-time issue in the gaping cesspit that was Centris and its outright competitive corruption. So here he was, sitting on the roof of an apartment building the next city spire over, with a pair of small but powerful custom binoculars right up against his visor. As his mind drifted somewhat while absently taking in all the details, the binoculars did double duty as a dual-lens camera anyways, so he wasn't too worried about missing things. The thing that really got to him was just how much work there was for each of the politicians. Ambassador Hlel was someone he'd spoken to a few times and was on good terms with, yet she was always so busy. The woman basically had a dozen full-time jobs running concurrently, and she had to pick and choose which duty would be the one she could work on while letting the rest fester. If she was standard as far as politicians go, then corruption was only half the pie. The rest was a sheer lack of infrastructure on one of the most populated and wealthy planets in the galaxy, which was just mind-bending to think about, and the sheer silence he'd gotten from the intelligence officers had been deafening when he'd reported that finding. Apparently, he had confirmed a few theories by offering the last few chunks of data to lock it in. He's dragged out of his musings as he sees Miss Jules open a hidden wall panel with a closed circuit communicator. He'd found that one, and had put a small bug in there to basically record what's going on through it and store it for later retrieval. It wouldn't broadcast any signals to stay hidden, and it blended flawlessly with the circuitry of the machine. It would take a technician or the blueprints being on hand to figure out something is up. The screen on the video phone activates, prompting the reaction behind the binoculars, beneath the visor, and through the Kevlar mask of an eyebrow quirking up on Herbert's face. Jules is talking to her double, or rather, the double is reporting into the original. Unfortunately, while he's been practicing his lip reading, they're not speaking a language he knows. It seems to be composed of mews and hisses from the way their mouths and throats are moving, but the body language is telling a story, and not a short one either. The one on the screen is coldly furious with a harsh glare for her double, but the anger is clearly misplaced unless he's massively misreading the situation. The double is both terrified and resigned. This is an old terror returned and renewed, a horrible experience, but one that's become nearly clockwork for the poor woman. The conversation goes on for a few minutes as Jules makes a long report to Swipe. Swipe's answer is terse and rude, and she cancels the call shortly after, leading to Jules sighing in relief. The woman seems to collect herself, and then she collects a small string with numerous credit discs dangling off it. The discs in question are mostly the red girdle crystal coins, but there are a couple pieces of bright blue tritite hanging from it as well. All told, there are 137 credits on that string. She ties it to her ornamental collar and it hangs into her breasts. Some fluffing of the fur later and it vanishes in her cleavage entirely. That explains what she does without pockets, at least. Herbert mutters to himself as she leaves the apartment, and several minutes later leaves the building entirely in her air car. His customized communicator vibrates in its pouch, and he draws it out to see that the tracker is working fine. He nods to himself and quickly makes his way across the rooftop and down the side of the building. The corner of the L-shaped building provides all the resistance he needs to scuttle down as a shadow. He makes it to the edge of the spire, and a quick glance either way, followed by a gathering of axiom, has him coil his legs under him and launch himself from one to the other. He lands silently and darts into the shadows of the building. Then he gets to the corner of this building and starts going up until he reaches the rooftop. A hop down onto the balcony of the level below brings him closer. He moves fast and drops down another level. Then two more, followed by one last drop. Then he focuses hard and fast, and seems to fade somewhat from reality as he hops forward. He passes through the reinforced and alarmed glass doorway as a ghost and pads through the apartment in utter silence. He slips up to the hidden component and focuses on his right arm, and it fades again. He reaches through the wall and into the device to grab the tiny listening bug and pull it out. He inspects the device to find it in perfect working order and deactivates it before opening a pouch. He draws out a second bug and places the used one into the pouch before reaching in and placing the new bug right where he took the old one from. Suddenly, the pouch with his custom communicator vibrates ever so, and he pulls it out. The tracking device is coming back and fast. He weighs his options and slips into a hiding place. He doesn't have to wait long. Miss Jules rushes in, hissing and snarling to herself in the strange, feely language, and quickly ransacks the apartment before grabbing something she forgot and storming out. Less informative than he would have liked, but knowing she's absent-minded isn't a bad thing. After another minute, he slinks out of his hiding spot and picks his way through the apartment. Then he fades away and rushes onto the balcony again. Axiom made things almost too easy. He climbs up to the top of the building from balcony to balcony, followed by a clamber down the side using its corner. He then hurls himself back to the previous spire and uncovers his personal transport and disguise. A loose pair of pants with a large shirt with unlaced boots and several hiding places for all the weapons and pouches. A safety helmet completes it, and he looks like he's just got a dark undershirt and gloves on. Nothing suspicious at all. His destination of the Dauntless might raise an eyebrow or two, but by the time anyone would think to stop him, he's already arrived and is passing off all his equipment to the Information and Intelligence Division. Of course, some people were now saying they were the Information, Intelligence, and Interrogation Division, with how many times they've been processing prisoners, but that was far from official. "Well done, young man. Any difficulties?" "Only my own impatience." "Something to work on," Herbert says as he exits the changing room with his civilian clothing back on and the stealth suit tucked under his arm. "Keep the suit, young man. Inform those who ask that we're concerned after the attack upon you and wove you some low-profile armor. That, and it keeps you well out of the pajamas and such," Sir Philip says, and Herbert nods in appreciation. "Very good. You're an able student. It's merely an unfortunate state of affairs that you're unable to infiltrate in disguise and can only do so in stealth. But needs must, as needs must." "Yes, sir. Now, with all due respect, I think I should be going. I've probably pushed things too far as is for a meeting with friends to be a proper excuse." "Unlikely, but possible. Go ahead," Sir Philip says, and Herbert starts rushing off and into the embassy spire proper. "Does he have any idea how much leeway his apparent youth affords him?" he asks out loud. Moments later, his communicator goes off. He picks it up and without missing a beat tells Herbert, "If you wish to leave listening devices on your superiors, don't immediately give it away by feigning prescience. Also, the fold of the collar, while an impressive place to place a bug without being caught, is quickly found out by those with a great deal of self-awareness." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir," Herbert replies. "Run along now." He prompts his apprentice as he pulls out the device from under his collar and deactivates it. "I'll be down tomorrow for remedial training." "Yes, sir," Herbert says as he stops the call. "So much for getting one over on the old bastard." He quickly finds his way back into the embassy he's been living in. He makes little attempt to hide himself as he comes in with a smile and mussed-up hair. then immediately begins fleeing from a trinity of Paris that notice him and know him as the one that's fun to chase and if caught alone and sitting gives scritches and wonderful rubs. "Whoops! Excuse me!" he says, skidding by a group of his Zedden brides, and there's already smiles all around as he dashes away from the utterly harmless critters he's established a nervousness of. "You're a goof!" one of them calls out, and he races to his room and skids inside of it before very quickly stashing the new outfit in plain view of Ambassador Hlela. He saw her, but she doesn't need to know that. "Still adjusting?" she asks, and he jumps a little to her amusement. "Oh, relax. It's just me." "Sorry, ma'am, I was—" "Excuse me," he says, climbing up the cupboard to avoid the incoming Paris. "They're harmless." She chides him ever so. "I understand that, but irrational fears are so named for a reason." Herbert volleys back. "Are you able to talk from up there?" she asks gently, and he nods. "Good. I was checking in to make sure you're safe. The more unpleasant elements of Centris are starting to really get their claws out and pointing them humanity's way. You proved yourself very thoroughly when you were attacked in the club, but more is happening. I'm concerned for your safety." "I appreciate it, ma'am. However, I'm more concerned for my wives. Despite being returned to my youth, I've had military training. I know how to handle myself when everything goes wrong. They don't." He replies, and she smiles. "You don't need to worry so much. You're married to Zedden and Yaoya, master hunters and top-tier predators. You need a Canador to face us directly in a fight. Maybe a Lytus if she's got a vicious streak," Ambassador Hlela remarks. "Perhaps, but training and tools count for a lot. I have those things, and from what I can tell, the girls don't. I don't know, a little tret, unused to Axiom side by side with a Zedden or a Yaoya. It's not even fair. Still, if you're more bothered by the Paris than the laser blasts you've been dodging, then I suppose I have nothing to worry about. Beyond your admittedly irrational fear," the ambassador says, and Herbert chuckles before hopping down. "Most of it's for entertainment. It's a wonderful icebreaker in conversations and has diffused a fair amount of arguments," he says, holding his hand down and letting one of the Paris crawl into it. He holds up the purring little beast to the ambassador. "Can you keep it between us?" Perhaps if you tell me what it was you just tucked away?" "It's some low-profile armor, full-body small-time protection. Nothing too extravagant, just really well-woven cloth and some goggles. The attacks have put everyone's back up on the Dauntless, and they're trying to find ways to keep everyone safe." "Ah, then maybe with those cultural weapons you might be on par with your brides by now. After all, every Zedden alive is armed and armored every moment of their lives, and the Yaoya are agile, strong, and stealthy enough to match us." "Hopefully human cunning and endurance can keep pace," Herbert remarks. "Hopefully," Ambassador Hlela says in a cheerful tone as she takes the Paris from Herbert and sweeps up the second in her tail. "I'm glad you're handling this so maturely," she says, leaving the room. "Until next we meet, Ambassador. Until then." Harriet the Spy. No one notices the tiny device, a vapid blonde of a tret drops, which then bounces to land on and embed itself into the side of a woman's boot. Of course, that women wouldn't notice how roughly a dozen different women that show up at random times have similar eye colors, as more than a few are walking with their noses in their communicators or books of all kinds. Not a ping on the Carib woman's radar as Harriet calls in the location. The information seemed good. The names pulled off the translated conversation that Herbert had intercepted was panning out. The woman notices nothing as something unseen and unseeable moves behind her. There is nothing to notice. The Yaoya and Cloaken have both been studied, and as the woman is being watched. Her gait is mimicked without sound or sight. Her body language and movements are mirrored. Codes are memorized, information taken in and observed, the accent carefully noted as the frequencies and data on her communicator are copied down. Inch by inch, there is nothing about this woman that remains a secret to her observer. Then she's let go for a time, unaware that in the hidden folds of her clothing tiny devices have been laid as hostile eyes, hidden by a gray visor, watch her from afar. "I've got what I need. I just need to practice," Harriet says into the comms, and there's a quick double tap on the receiver of the watcher's microphone. No sound from him as he continues the chase. "Then return to the Dauntless. We need to plan out this next move with precision," Control states, and she nods before heading to her nearby vehicle and fading back to visibility. It takes her about an hour and 3 more faces to make her way back to the Dauntless, as her paranoia is seriously pricking at the back of her neck. After finding her way into the few rooms set aside for the intelligence division, and after setting some things aside, focuses. Her body shifts to mimic the stance of the woman she followed, then her frame and profile shiver to show the Carib instead. This will be difficult. I don't actually have axiom-infused antlers. You do face a challenge, young lady, however. It can be turned into an advantage in a number of ways, Sir Philip says as he goes over a printout of the information nearby. His eyebrow goes up as a new piece of data is sent. Especially if young Mr. Herbert keeps sending us more information, he notes with a smile on his face. Really? How? How can a flaw in disguise be useful? Harriet asks, and Sir Philip opens his mouth to answer before reconsidering and drawing an egg timer out of his blazer pocket. There are 3 rather easy ones. I'd appreciate it if you could tell me what one of them is before the timer runs out. He says, setting down the little hourglass, and she stares for a moment before gathering herself and thinking fast and hard. If we could get a large amount of illusion projectors that make this image and sound, then we might be able to sow enormous confusion. It'd be a great getaway if they're trying to look for the false Carib, but everyone's the false Carib. Sowing chaos is an option, yes. You could also use it as a paranoia gambit if you and the woman you are replacing are both on the ground. Have people attack her after using both your disguise and some stealth to basically have the woman taken down in paranoia. Interesting. What's the other option? You use the gaps in the illusion to smuggle extra equipment and gear. No one's going to be moving around the upside of your head, and you're expected to be mindful of it. It may be awkward and somewhat heavy, but you could dismantle a gun and balance its parts on your head with a proper frame, and that is merely scratching the surface. So we have chaos, paranoia, and smuggling for options. That's I want to do all 3. Harriet says, and there's some brief applause from an outright proud-looking Sir Philip. Excellent. You're truly getting into the mindset of a spy. Gentlemen, you heard the lady. Get started on an equipment rig to balance on the head, numerous illusion projectors, and get it done quickly. This mission is going ahead soon. I'll have to grab some of the nerd squad. They understand Axiom better than anyone else on the ship. One of the intelligence operators says, standing up from his terminal. Excuse me, he says, leaving the room. Herbert is getting rather good at finding the codes. He's tracked Madame Regards into Miss Swipe's personal sanctuary. It's in a large agricultural spire 3/4 of the way up. Apparently the woman's been growing and manufacturing narcotics. One of the intelligence officers reads out from the report he's making of Herbert's observations. What form of narcotics? Sir Philip asks, walking over to read over the man's shoulder. Seems to be the equivalent of opiates, illegal in a lot of systems and on most but not all spires here on Centris. Division of laws again. See what they are on that spire in particular. Perhaps there are some loopholes of use. Still can't believe that the debate of laws is big enough that it's effectively different on each damn spire. The intelligence officer mutters to himself. Most of them follow a standard set, but there are enough deviations such as the portions of the embassy spires that can baffle a man. Sir Philip reminds him. Regardless, that just gives us greater cause to pay attention and a great deal more wiggle room to toy with. Looking into it, sir, the officer remarks as he starts researching on a second screen. Sir, we've got our nerd, the officer says, leading a soldier in. Sir! The nerd snaps off a salute to Sir Philip, who waves him down with a gentle chuckle. That's quite enough, Mr. Lore. Do you understand why you've been requested here? I'm one of the 3 best enchanters all humanity has, which is both boasting and not, he says with a chuckle, and Harriet can see he speaks with a lot of hand motions. What can I make for you, sir? As you can see, we have an agent under illusion. We need some items to allow her to place those illusions on others with some kind of control method. Sir Philip remarks, and Mr. Lore considers for a few moments while rubbing his chin. Then he breaks out in a smile. I can do that. I'm going to need a few Kutha discs worth of metal. How many pieces do you expect to need? Let's go with a baker's dozen. All right, that should be doable with 3 discs then. I am also going to need our agent's assistance so I can get the disguise down on them properly. Laura remarks before moving fast to catch the trinity of coins that Sir Philip flicks at him with his thumb. I'll get started then. he says, walking over to a nearby desk that's only half full of paperwork and placing the discs in a tiny stack. I'm going to assume that we have a miss under that illusion, he remarks, turning to Harriet, who crosses her arms. Yes, Harriet responds. Could you stand beside me while I do this? I mostly just need your proximity to copy samples of the axiom construct you're maintaining, he says, and she walks over. Excellent. This should only take a few moments. These doohickeys will only work once properly, but won't be traceable after. You want repeatable fun, then you give me time to slowly work something together. Oh no, temporary is preferable as pieces might be lost in the field, Sir Philip says. Good, 'cause these work for an hour at most and then revert to charged kutha chunks without any real distinctive patterns. It's the trick of making these totems without binding them to a specific person. You have to accept them as temporary or immensely complicated with an array to cause them to attune and reattune over and over. I see. And how long will this one take to make? Sir Philip asks, and Mr. Lore chuckles before turning around with the stack of discs. He picks up the topmost one and shakes his hand to show the 2 discs beneath are in pieces. Done. The disc will activate each of the individual pieces depending on the Roman numerals on them. Just hide one of the pieces on someone and then activate it by running a touch of axiom into the corresponding number, Laura remarks, holding out the device to Harriet. Remember the main coin affects the ones it's tied to? Okay. I'll get something like a magazine or Pez dispenser for these to keep them all straight, Harriet mutters, and Sir Philip chuckles. Or I could hide each one somewhere different on me and simply keep track of them that way. She remarks, and he nods. Not everything is due to a gadget or do a gadget to facilitate. No matter how convenient things get, young lady, you must never neglect the basics. They're the foundation upon which all else stands. Sir Philip lectures, and Harriet nods. All right, this is interesting. Apparently anything can be grown on an agricultural spire so long as you label it correctly. There's a refining and manufacturing spire half the city away that actually processes the drugs, and it also has a loophole. Our boy in the field is showing a big triangle where all of this isn't against the letter of the law while it thoroughly violates the spirit of it. One of the intelligence officers notes with a tone of disgust in his voice. So it's legal? It's a loophole. Like how if someone is provoked into slapping you and you beat them into a coma, so long as you don't pull a knife on them or outright kill them, it's technically fine in legal terms. Morally disgusting, but legal. The officer notes, and Sir Philip nods. It was a trick he had to avoid a few times in his youth. The general rule of thumb that if someone wants you angry, it's in your best interest to be calm. There has got to be some kind of law against entrapment, Mr. Lore protests, and the officers shake their head. Dear God in heaven! There are so many races and cultures and religions that everything is violently provocative to someone somewhere, and Centris is under the delusion that everyone wants to be here. Therefore, provocation isn't a crime because it's regarded as inevitable. Responding to the provocation, however, is. That's nothing. Due to the way some religions are completely crazy, there are a few spires, not many thankfully, that have it so raping a man isn't illegal. One of the intelligence officers notes, I've been to one of them. They're even more lacking in men than the normal spires, and that's a once-in-a-blue-moon kind of thing, Harriet notes. What kind of messed-up religion makes it legal to rape a man? Laura demands in a disgusted tone. After this question you're leaving, young man. We still have more work to do. Yes, sir, Mr. Lore states. Anyways, the Church of the Gravid Mother, also known as gravidation. Basically, one of their central tenets is that men have one purpose in the galaxy, to breed. Therefore, if a man isn't a father, then he's a failure and is to be made into a father. Despite their absolutely disgusting approach to things, they do a lot of charity work and have a massive system for disaster relief set up. They have hundreds of splinter faiths of varying terms and tenets, but most see a man as a walking phallus. The intelligence officer reads out, and Harriet snorts at the absurdity as she lets her disguise drop. And there are a fair number of other misandrist religions. Many of them are publicly decried for their cruel treatment, but the arguments go back and forth and on for days. Huh. Oh yes, some more extreme castes have it so the men are swathed only in white robes that leaves only the upper half of the face exposed. They signify that he's done his dues and is not in season, meaning to be left alone. Any other man is asking for it, according to them. Good Lord, I need a drink, Mr. Lore remarks as he leaves the room. By the by, it would be best if you were to forget what you've seen in this room, Sir Philip notes lightly. Hard whiskey it is, then, Lore remarks with a thumbs up as he leaves the room.